So under normal circumstances, it can take years, often as long as 10, 15, 20 years, to bring a vaccine candidate from its initial preclinical study all the way to market. The steps in that process start, of course, with all the preclinical work. This may be animal models of disease, making sure that the vaccines don't cause any obvious side effects. Once those studies look okay, we go to phase 1 trials, where this is a small group, maybe a few dozen humans, healthy volunteers, who are tested with the vaccine. And this is often just figuring out what dose is most appropriate. Is it 1 dose or 2 doses or more? And the outcome for those types of studies is, do they generate an antibody response? If those studies look good, then we move to phase 2 trials, which are larger studies that may be a few thousand patients at most, or volunteers. Again, looking at that antibody response as the outcome of whether this vaccine is effective or not. And of course, through all these studies, they're looking at potential safety outcomes as well. If the phase 2 studies look good, then phase 3, and that's where we see studies of maybe tens of thousands. 30 to 60,000 patients, volunteers are typical for these types of studies. And typically now, instead of only looking for whether the person generates an antibody response, you're also looking for, are they actually protected from disease? These are randomized studies. They're blinded, which means neither the person receiving the vaccine nor the investigators know whether the person got a vaccine or a placebo. Now, if all of those studies look good, then the pharmaceutical company can apply for approval in the US from the Food and Drug Administration. The FDA will review all that data and look, not only is the vaccine effective, but is it safe based on the studies that are shown. If the vaccine is approved, it then goes to this subcommittee of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, known as the ACIP, or Advisory Committee on Immunization Practice. The ACIP looks at all the same data and really then decides, is this vaccine that's just been approved, what populations should it be approved for? And they can either say, yes, it should go to the same populations that the FDA said. They can say, oh, it should only be given to certain populations, or they can say, we're not going to approve it. And then even after all that happens and the vaccine is released to market, there is ongoing safety monitoring that is then fed back to both the CDC and the FDA, just to make sure there's not any other safety signals that once the vaccine is out in a larger group of recipients that weren't detected in the earlier trials. For COVID-19, we obviously don't have the luxury of waiting 10, 15 years for vaccines to be developed. So a lot of what has happened with the funding for the pharmaceutical companies has been to take away some of that financial risk, because all of these trials are very expensive. And so you wouldn't normally do your phase 2 trial until your phase 1 was completely thoroughly analyzed and done. And you wouldn't move to a phase 3 trial until your phase 2 trial was completely done. So what's happened with COVID vaccination development is that these trials are happening a little bit more concurrently, but the fundamental data that we're all waiting for is that phase 3 trial to show whether or not these vaccines are safe, as best we can detect in 30 to 60,000 people who've received them, as well as, of course, effective. And meanwhile, the vaccines are being manufactured at large scale. Now, typically, a pharmaceutical company would never start to manufacture a vaccine until they knew it was approved, which obviously delays the whole process. So the government has taken on some of that risk, allowing the manufacturers to make vaccine, knowing that if the trials do not pan out and the vaccine either doesn't work or it's not safe, those doses will never be given to people. They'll be discarded. I think it's also important to understand that while the FDA and the CDC, who ultimately are in charge of this approval and recommendation process, are government agencies staffed by government employees, and there's a lot of concern about the potential for politicization of the process. Both the FDA and the CDC have these advisory councils that really are the ones that are analyzing the data, making sure that their recommendations are sound. And these are private citizens, so they're academicians, they're scientists, they are not employed by the pharmaceutical companies, and they really are trying to do the most benefit with the least amount of harm in their recommendations. So I think people should be confident that any vaccine that actually makes it to market has been reviewed extremely extensively, and if there are any known concerns about safety in particular, those will be addressed and those vaccines will not be released.